Good afternoon, everyone. As Perrin said, my name is Carla Zoram. I'm the project assistant of the WiSE program. Before introducing the session, I would like to do the acknowledgement of country. Western Sydney University would like to acknowledge that there are people who are the traditional custodians of the land that we are on today. We acknowledge and pay respects to elders, past and present, who have given us time, knowledge, and guidance. We appreciate the rich contribution and resilience that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people provide to the Western Sydney University. Today, we're presenting a new edition of the WiSE Talk series. As you might know, this is a new WiSE program initiative this year, connecting students in the program virtually with professional women working in the STEM industry. Well, now my colleague Perrin will introduce our speakers from today.
So we're very excited today to be joined by two of our alumni. We've got Leesa, Ellam, and Abbie Chapman. Abbie was also a WiSE program student, so it's even more exciting to have you on board with us today. Welcome. So Leesa is the training officer working at the Forensic Analytical Science Service. She's responsible for overseeing the labs training program and coordinating the training activities. Prior to this, Leesa was a forensic chemist with the field operations team with New South Wales Police Force. The team was responsible for chemical analysis of samples related to suspected prohibited drug manufacture. As part of her role, Leesa has experience attending suspected prohibited drug manufacture crime scenes and providing expert evidence for court in the area of prohibited drug manufacture. She also has worked as a scenes of crime officer with New South Wales Police Force, examining scenes of volume crime and collecting fingerprint and DNA evidence. Sounds all very exciting. We also have Abbie Chapman. Abbie is currently the scientific officer at FASS. She is a part of cohort of scientists that are responsible for the chemical analysis of illicit drugs for stakeholders, including New South Wales Police Force, New South Wales Communities, and Justice, and New South Wales Health. Previously, Abbie was a technical officer within the instrument and technical support team, and the team was in charge of the operation and maintenance of analytical instruments, quality control, and preparation of lab regions and standards. Abbie recently completed a Master of Forensic Science with Western as well. So thank you very much for joining us today and welcome. We are very excited to hear about your career journeys and your experiences. So we'll hand over to you, Leesa and Abbie.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the intro and thanks for inviting us to these WiSE series talks. So we're excited to be here. As Perrin mentioned, my name's Leesa Ellam, and I work as the training officer for the Illicit Drugs Analysis Unit at FASS, which is the Forensic and Analytical Science Service at LIDCOM. I'm also an alumni of WSU back when it was UWS with a biomedical science degree as well as a forensic science degree. My experience with the WiSE program has been from giving a talk at one of the last year's industry visits at FASS last year, and also I attended the end of year WiSE event as an industry person, so that was really good. That was good experience meeting people and getting to chat to everyone. So that's my experience with WiSE so far. So I'll hand over to Abbie to give a bit of an introduction before we start a bit about our talk.
Thanks, Leesa. Hi everyone, my name is Abbie Chapman. Thank you for having me today. My current role is a scientific officer within the Illicit Drug Analysis Unit at FASS. As Perrin mentioned earlier, I'm a Western Sydney alumni. I have a Bachelor of Science with a Forensic Chemistry major and recently completed a Master of Forensic Science. I joined the WiSE program during my undergraduate degree.
So as I mentioned before, sorry, before I start, everyone can see my screen okay? Yep. So as I mentioned previously, I work for FASS, and FASS is a part of the New South Wales Health Pathology, which is part of the wider New South Wales Health. While most of our departments have a focus on forensics and the justice system, we also have departments that are focused on health and community health and safety. But even within the forensic departments, we do have projects and other work that does have a community safety focus as well as a justice focus. So being part of health, that's also part of our who we are, and what we do is also community safety and community health, as well as forensics and justice. So yeah, so that's a bit about who we are. I started my career in a microbiology lab. So after completing my first degree in biomedical science, I was lucky to get a position at the lab that I was currently doing work experience at. So that was a microbiology lab, testing food and water. So I had, part of my role was making reagents, media, and also conducting some analysis, microbiological analysis. I quickly realized it probably wasn't what I really wanted to do. When it came to choosing a degree at school, I really didn't actually know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work in science, but I really didn't know what my options were. And I kind of just jumped, to be honest, I jumped into one and I picked biomedical science. And so when about a year after into doing this role, I realized this wasn't quite what I wanted to do. And so back to uni I went and I studied forensic science. So I was lucky to still work part-time in my job at the microbiology lab. So I still worked there, and at some stage I went to doing shift work with data entry in the same company, so I could still undertake my university degree, so I was quite lucky. At the end of my last forensic science subject, so when I was still at uni, I was lucky enough to gain a position with New South Wales Police Force as a scenes of crime officer, so what's commonly known as a SOCO. So I still remember my first day rocking up to the police headquarters, super nervous, having no idea what I was in for, walking around seeing a group of people who were there for our first day of training, and me and one other girl that I'd vaguely remembered from university classes awkwardly waving at each other, not sure if we really knew each other. Fast forward 14 years, she's one of my best friends. So, but yeah, I still remember that first day of walking into training and having no idea what I was doing. So I was just finishing up uni, and yeah, I was very happy to have scored this role, to have won this role. And so I undertook my training. It was quite a few weeks of training as part of the role. And I was eventually stationed at St Mary's Police Station. So my role there was essentially to attend scenes of volume crime, so break and enters, stolen cars, things like that. Document the scene, collect any fingerprint evidence, so look for fingerprints, and collect any DNA evidence if it's present. So look for potential blood to swab, trace DNA swabs, things like that. So that was my role. I'd never really wanted to work long term and in crime scene. For me, it was, didn't really know much about what options were out there and what avenues I could look to. So I thought this was a good start, get some experience, get some exposure, and work out what roles are out there. I always, in my mind, I was going to work in a DNA lab, 100%. That's what I wanted to do. That's all I wanted to do was work in a DNA lab. Yeah, that was 2006 when I got that SOCO role. It's 2020 and I'm currently still in a chemistry lab. So that didn't actually end up happening, but we'll get to that later. So for me, it was just getting some exposure to forensics, and I really did enjoy it, but it wasn't where I wanted to work permanently. So in the end, I worked as a SOCO for about 2 years, mostly attending crime scenes in the St Mary's local area command, but also helping out the other regions around me when they needed help. In 2009, I was lucky to undertake a secondment, which later on became permanent, to the police clan lab section. So that was the section that was half lab work, half crime scene work. So that suited me perfectly. I had some crime scene experience to bring, but also I was able to explore some lab work as well as a chemistry lab. So that clan lab department was responsible for attending crime scenes where it's suspected that illegal drugs were being manufactured. So, to attend the crime scene, document the crime scene through videos and photos, render the scene safe because they're considered hazardous chemical crime scenes. So turning off any active processes, dealing with any chemical hazards or physical hazards that come up. Then also a lot of documenting exhibits, describing exhibits, taking samples, conducting some in-field testing, be that colour tests or some handheld devices, and a lot of heavy lifting, like a lot of heavy lifting. Yeah, if anyone thinks Clan Lab is glamorous, it really isn't. It's wearing Breaking Bad suits in 35 degree sunny days. Yeah, and I definitely enjoyed it. It was just not the most fun experience in the middle of summer when you're wearing full plastic and a face mask in burning heat. So yeah, it was an experience. So for me, yeah, part of that was the scene attendance work, but also the other part of Clan Lab was also doing some analysis, some chemical analysis in the lab. So looking at the samples that we collected and doing some screening. This role, we started out in police, but about 2013, our team got moved from police over to health, where I am now at FASS. So the whole team of us got moved, and we still continued that role, although the crime scene part of it became less and less, and it's now not a main part of what they do. I mean, no longer being in that team anymore, but I worked in the Clan Lab section anyway from 2009 till 2017. And so as well as the analysis role, part of that was working both as a scientific officer as well as a senior scientific officer. So at some stage I became a senior member of the team, and I was in charge of supervising a team of analysts who were analysing the samples. I also was responsible for producing opinion statements. So looking at the results of the analysis, looking at photos, videos, evidence such as seized documents, all sorts of computer files, and trying to paint a picture, like put the jigsaw puzzle together and work out, were any prohibited drugs being made? If so, what drugs, what methods were being used, how much drug was being made? Was there any previous evidence of previous manufacturers? Could there be more made in the future? Was there chemicals to make it in the future? So all this kind of thing, putting together an opinion statement, and if on occasion giving evidence at court, which can be quite an intensive process, usually giving evidence for several days straight in court, but it's part of the job. It's intense, but it's part of the job. So that was that role there. And again, I never, when I initially took this role as a common and initial job back in 2009, I never really thought this was where I was going to end up. This was a stepping stone again to like getting to know what the lab, getting experience in working in a working lab, and getting to know what laboratory jobs are out there. It turned into an 8.5-year stepping stone. That was quite a stepping stone. And I quickly realized once I got involved that actually DNA lab isn't what I wanted to do. It was this concept in my mind that I had this tunnel vision of what I wanted to do. And when I got down to it, it wasn't necessarily, once I opened my mind up to different aspects, I realized that maybe that isn't exactly what I wanted to do. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I chose the path that I did, because I ended up in this lab for 8.5 years now. So in this role, sorry, for 8.5 years, and I learned a lot. Especially being a supervisor of a team, that I learned quite a lot of that, and a lot of responsibility, especially being at crime scenes, being in charge of being the lead chemist and coordinating a lot of activities and liaising with police and fire, New South Wales Fire and Safety. So a lot of that, a lot of skills developing in there. So I forgot to mention at the start, if anyone has any questions around along the way, please feel free to jump in and ask. At any stage that you want. Sorry, I was supposed to mention that at the start. But yeah, so then, so that was what I did till 2017. And by 2017, well, I still enjoyed it and realized I really wanted a new challenge. I wanted something a little bit different. And I started looking more outside of directly in science. So all of a sudden this training officer role became available, and all of a sudden I realized that is exactly what I want to do. I didn't, as soon as I got mentioned, I realized this is it. This is what I wanted to do. It was something I was really passionate about. So I went and got my certificate 4 in training assessment, and I was lucky. I managed to, I applied for the job, and I ended up getting that job. So it was a bit of a learning curve for me, because this was completely out of the blue. I'd worked in science jobs up until this point, and while I still work in the science lab, it's kind of using my skills in a different way, using my problem solving, critical thinking skills in a different way than directly in science. So this was the first time we had a training officer role in this department. So it was definitely a jump in the deep end, and try and work out what this role looks like, what it's going to be doing, how it fits with the team. So something that I had to really develop, and I was, a little bit apprehensive at first about it, but looking really forward to it. So the role of the training officer is really to coordinate and manage the training activities of the entire laboratory. I not only coordinate the day-to-day activities, but I also write the training program for the whole laboratory. When I first started, part of my role was to overhaul the whole training. So look at the training, look at what we needed, the gaps, and rewrite the whole training program. So that's pretty much the main part of my role. Another big part is the induction of new staff members. So staff members will come to me for their induction, and I'll take them through the process. And that's something I really like and really passionate about, is mentoring new staff members through the process, through when they first arrive. I remember being new at jobs, and it's kind of scary, it's intimidating, you don't know what to expect and what's expected of you. So I like to try and make that process as smooth as possible. And I like to see people develop. So they come in, they're all shy, they're uncertain of themselves, and then you watch them develop and get involved more and more in the laboratory, and coming up with ideas of their own, and coming up with improvements. And it's really, really good to see. And it's something I really enjoy. I make sure I pop in and chat with them every now and again and see how they're going when they're going through. Even after a year, I'm still going, how are you going? How's it going? Like, I'm very hands-on, especially when they're going through all their training. I like to make sure everything's going smoothly and they're okay. And pretty much, I've open door policy, so people come see me if they've got problems, or if they're a bit unsure about things. So I like to try and make things as smooth sailing as possible, because it can be quite a scary process starting a new job. So especially when it's one of your first main jobs coming out of uni. So that's my main day-to-day. I've also involved in other training type activities. So looking at creating training workshops for professional development across FASS, and even within our department in the drugs lab. So myself and the DNA forensic biology training officer developed a train the trainer program. And that was looking at upskilling people who act as trainers within FASS. So looking at professional development for trainers. I've also run or coordinated some Clan Lab workshops. So that was looking at upskilling the current Clan Lab team, their background knowledge, their understanding of drug manufacture, as well as looking to get the other staff in the drugs lab some new skills and understanding about how drug manufacture works and how the analysis works within their unit. So that's something I like to do, is look for opportunities we have to upskill our workforce, and it's always fun to do so, and like really rewarding. So that's something we're looking at developing more, COVID willing. It's put a bit of a spanner on the works, so we're trying to shift some of our things online a little, or work out how that's going to look. So it's put a bit of damper in the works, but we'll get there. Other things I like to do is find creative solutions to problems. I like problem solving. It's kind of what I like. What I like most about my job is finding creative ways to tackle a problem. So I just chose this as an example. So one of the problems I had was coming up with training and procedures for a new procedure looking at examining high risk exhibits, so fentanyl type substances that are a bit more risky, and we have to worry about environmental contamination, trace level contamination within our workspace, so not contaminating our workspace. these substances. So I came up with this idea of using fluorescent substance as the exhibit powder, so we could look at how the environmental contamination occurs throughout our workspace, and looking at not only showing that our procedures that we put in place did work because this contamination didn't occur, but trying to show to staff why it's important, these procedures are important. So coming up with different ways to try and get people on board with different ideas and training and different procedures. So that's something I like to enjoy, something that I put kind of worked on as a project to just kind of bring people on board with the idea of we need to have this procedure and why it's important. So yeah, just a little thing I like to work on. Yeah, I'll hand it over to Abbie now for a bit on her career, and then afterwards we'll touch a bit on recruitment and some tips and tricks for recruitment and ongoing careers. So unless anyone has any particular questions at this point, but we're happy to do questions at the end as well.
All right, so I'll start with my educational background. In 2016, I started at Western Sydney Uni with a Bachelor of Science Pathways to Teaching. I got 1 year into my degree and decided that it wasn't for me and that I really enjoyed the chemistry component of the degree. So I switched degrees to just a Bachelor of Science and a Forensic Chemistry major. I completed that in 2018. And then I went on to continue postgraduate study in 2019 with a Master of Forensic Science. During my time at Western Sydney, I was fortunate enough to receive a New Colombo Plan scholarship, which allowed me to travel to the Philippines with fellow science students to complete an internship, which was based on managing sustainability in the Philippines. My career in forensic science began 15 months ago when I was offered a technical officer position in the drugs lab at FASS. Prior to this, during my studies, I had an admin and events job in the oil industry. I entered this technical officer position with no experience in the forensics field besides what I learned at uni. However, I was able to build the skills required to fill this position, including teamwork, problem solving, communication, the ability to work under pressure and to a deadline, and independence through my prior positions, which really helped me start off at FASS. Now I'm just going to talk a bit about the IDAU drugs lab, what we do. So in the illicit drugs analyst unit, we provide a statewide service to New South Wales Police Force. We perform the testing of seized drugs within New South Wales. The drug lab also analyses samples from the Ministry of Health which are related to suspected drug overdoses, which could have been found nearby on the patient at the time. And we provide New South Wales Health with public health alerts from the health alerts of any substances with high dosage or a unique combination of drugs and fentanyl type substances for community safety. As Leesa also mentioned, our lab also has a field operations unit that analyses samples collected from suspected clan labs. Some common drugs that we see in the laboratory include cannabis, methamphetamine, MDMA, heroin, synthetic cannabinoids, other amphetamine type substances, LSD, cocaine, steroids, pharmaceuticals, and counterfeit pharmaceuticals. So our lab consists of a lab manager, who we all report to, senior scientific officers, a training officer, Leesa, an admin officer, scientific officers, and technical officers. We also have technical assistants from the FASS receipt unit that float in and out of the laboratory too. So a bit about my role. So for the last month and a half, I've been undertaking high grade duties as a scientific officer. I'm part of a cohort of scientists that carry out the chemical analysis of illicit drugs. Previous to this position, I was a technical officer in the instrument and technical support team in the drugs lab, which are in charge of the operation and maintenance of all the analytical instruments, including FTIR, GCMS, GCFID, UPLC, and LCMS-MS. This team also looks after the quality control of the laboratory equipment, including the in-house calibration checks for the balances, pipettes, povers, temperature monitoring of fridges, and is responsible for all the preparation of standards and colour reagents that we use in the lab. So I'll talk a bit about my day-to-day. As a scientific officer, each day can vary with the different types of exhibits that we deal with. These can include liquids, powders, tablets, and pharmaceuticals. With the chemical analysis of drugs, it involves opening and describing the exhibit, taking photos when required, and obtaining a weight. We undertake presumptive colour tests and sometimes presumptive tests with handheld devices such as a TrueNarc. And then the exhibit is prepared for qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis if required by solvent extraction. Yeah, back to you, Leesa.
Sorry about that. I'm just going to talk for a little bit about recruitment and career, just a bit of advice I would like to give, given that I'm heavily involved with a lot of recruitment here at FASS, especially within our department. So I've had a lot of recent experience undertaking interviews, going through job applications. Some of you, if you've applied in the past, might see my name occasionally there or have contacted me. So I just thought I'd pass on some advice, and afterwards maybe Abbie can share any advice that she's come across from applying for jobs herself. But just so a few things I wanted to go through was one, is just look for relevant experience. It might sound obvious, but consider, like, don't just get some tunnel vision about where you think you want to work and what that experience needs to look like. Any experience that's relevant to science it was relevant to our work. Yeah, basically keep trying. Like it is, we get hundreds of applications each time we have a position available. So obviously the more experience you have, the better opportunity you have to get a role. So you just really got to keep trying, but consider other avenues where you can get some relevant experience, not just forensics, other science work, but also think about what your other work experiences and your other roles, non-science roles, brings to the table as well, because there's some really relevant skills that come in. If you look at, for instance, one of some of our entry-level positions, like technical officer positions, is looking for teamwork, communication, problem solving. Those are not specific to science. Your degree will give you some of the tools that you need to have for these skills, but they also come from your life experiences and your other working experiences too. So don't underestimate those. It's really important. So keep an open mind. Like I said before, I was adamant that I was going to work in the drugs lab. The DNA. I was adamant that I was going to work in the DNA lab. I wanted to do DNA analysis, and that's where I was heading. And and that's not where I headed at all, and it's not somewhere that I think would have personally suited me. So that's something that I realized pretty quickly, that I had this idea in my head of what I wanted, but it wasn't actually really what I wanted. And even when it came to this training role, I was all of a sudden apprehensive. So do I really want to step out of this science role into a training officer role? Well, I'm still working in a science lab. It isn't doing bench work. I'm not doing science day to day. I'm actually coordinating. And I realized I had to let go of this notion that no, I needed to work in a scientific role. I have a degree. The skills that I learned through that, critical thinking, the problem solving, that is all still relevant to what I do. And I'm lucky I still get to use my science knowledge and background just in a different way. But it did take me a little bit of accepting, like, yes, it is okay to step outside of what I think is what I'm supposed to do. So you got to get out of this notion of what you're supposed to do in life and see where work takes you. You don't know where things are going to take you next. So, I mean, I'm personally still open to future challenges, and I'm always looking to take on different projects and different work that excite me and interest me. And I don't know where that's going to take me. And I've got to keep an open mind that it could be you could be doing anything. So that's one of the things. The other thing would be to stop and think about what are some of the core skills that you've developed and demonstrated in your past, like be that university or work experiences. Just really take an analytical mind to your past experiences and things you've done and things you've achieved, and really think about what are the core skills that I've shown here, or what is something that I've really developed, be that problem solving, innovation, teamwork, creativity. These are all really important, and people tend to underestimate how important these are. In my personal opinion, when you come into a role here at our laboratory, you'll get the training you need to be able to put your knowledge into practice. We will train you on the day-to-day of how to do things. We will give you the training for a lot of your work. Obviously, you come in with your own knowledge from your degree, but we will give you the training that you need to do the work. But those core skills that you bring with you are just as important. So don't underestimate how important those are. And you've really got to stop and think about the things you've done and analyze them and kind of work out what are some of the skills that you're really showing there and you've really developed. And for different people, there'll be different strengths. So you're not going to have the strongest skill set in all of the core skills, but there'll be some key ones that are really important to you. And I can, as someone who's been a part of a lot of interview panels, I can tell you that the ones that you're most passionate about and most important to you actually do come through an interview. I can tell when you get excited and you're telling us a story about something you've achieved, when you're talking about a certain core skill, I can tell when it's something that's really important to you. It actually tells you a lot more than you think about the person, about what's important to them, what their priorities are, what their strengths are. And there is no right or wrong answers when it comes to that skill set. Some people are just good at problem solving, some are good at communication, some are really good at teamwork, but it's really interesting to see that what is important. I think it comes down to personal skills, but also values. What do you find is important to you, and what do you think you can bring to the organization? And I think that's a really important thing. And I think people just assume it's all technical skills. That side doesn't matter. They're only looking for technical side. And I'm like, we're not. We're looking for who you are and how you and what you can bring to our organization. It's really important. So yeah, consider that. And also when you're looking at job applications and going for interviews, look at the synopsis look at the description of the job. Try and break down what core skills are going to be important for this role. What are they looking for? Because I guarantee you at least some of those core skills are going to be interview questions. They're going to be quite obvious and they're going to be stated that they're looking for those skills, or they're going to be implied somewhere in the questioning, or they're going to be asking you to apply those skills. So it's something worth noting about and keeping your back pocket. If you think about what core skills you've developed and demonstrated over in your experiences, they're the good things to keep in your mind when it comes to interview questions that you can bring out and discuss. Because usually there's one or two that come out in interview questions. So that's something really important. But also when you're thinking about them, go a bit deeper than surface level. So a lot of times there's usually, a lot of positions, not just in science, everywhere wants teamwork skills. I guarantee you everyone has done teamwork of some sort in university. You don't get through a university degree without having done some sort of teamwork assessment or task. You need to delve a little bit deeper and just going, I was part of a team and we finished this practical. You need to tell us how you did that. What was the skills you showed? Just surface level, you've got to think you're actually applying with hundreds of people. You need to tell us more than you achieve that, because just saying you worked as a team to achieve something doesn't say that you actually have the teamwork skills. You need to spell it out for us, basically, what you bring to the table in terms of teamwork skills. One of the other areas I was going to mention was criteria. So especially for any government job, if there is selection criteria for that job, so a list of questions that you have to answer, these are some of the most important aspects of the job. So consider any application you're writing addressing selection criteria as your written interview. It is really important, and you've got to consider that you could be up against hundreds of other people for this position who've all got the same degrees as you, potentially a similar level of experience. So you can't just, you need to consider how you can address this criteria well. So essentially we you may not get an interview, even if you meet the criteria. If we've got hundreds of people that meet the criteria, well, we can't interview everybody. So you kind of got to pay attention to these selection criteria and really try to address it well. And make sure you're looking at all the criteria. A lot of the criteria has multi-levels, more than one aspect to it. So you need to try and meet all the criteria. And some people find it difficult because they don't have an example that meets the entire criteria. You can break it up, like try and address the criteria in different parts. So you can address it as a whole all with all your examples. So don't feel like if you don't meet the criteria 100%, you can't apply, and that your example doesn't work for that application if it doesn't 100% meet that criteria. We're looking for you to demonstrate the technical knowledge, to technical skills, but also the core skills as well. And so think about, if you don't have the exact example that you're looking for, think of something that is equivalent. So something equivalent that shows the equivalent skill set that they're looking for, and try and use that. That would be my other tip. But also, very importantly, if the question asks you to demonstrate something, it's actually asking for an example. You can't just talk around the skill. You need to give us an actual example and spell out how you demonstrated that. That is important, because if you don't give us an example that clearly illustrates that skill set or that core skill, you won't have passed that criteria. So a lot of people check, like if it talks about demonstrated time for team, like given a demonstrated time you use teamwork, people will just talk about how teamwork is a skill, not actually delving into it, an actual instance that they showed good teamwork skills. So make sure you consider that when you're addressing the criteria. And the last one I really want to talk about is this, something I hear quite a lot. It's this notion, this idea that for a lot of women, we tend to not apply for jobs because we see ourselves as not ready, as not quite ready for this position. We look at the selection criteria or the role and say, oh, I can't do that. I'm not there yet, or I just don't have the level of experience necessary. And I'm guilty of that too. I'll put my hand up and say, I'm guilty of that. Once I had to be talked into applying for a role that everyone else was convinced that I was suitable for, but I had convinced myself that I wasn't. It's this, I hear it a lot as well from people, and it does, generally speaking, it tends to be women who feel they need to meet 100% of the criteria in order to be eligible for a job. So they'll look at it and go, I don't meet all that, I can't do all that, therefore I'm not going to apply. Whereas generally speaking, men will look at that and say, I can do 60% of that. The other 40% I can learn, I can develop those skill sets, and they will apply. So we really need to talk ourselves out of this idea that we have to be able to walk into a role. Unless you've already done that role, you can't walk into a role. No role is possible for you to step right in without some sort of learning and development, without some sort of learning curve for you. You are, the expectation of when you apply for a job is not that you can walk in and start doing it on day one. It's that you can do this role with the necessary amount of training. So there is expectation that you aren't going to be perfectly suited on day one to this role. So we need to get out of this headspace where we aren't quite ready. I've had to talk to a few staff members where I've asked, I've overheard them say, oh, I was thinking about applying for that job, but I just don't think I'm there yet. And I know full well from experience that they are definitely there and they are definitely ready. And the worst comes to worst, if you apply for a job and you're not, maybe if you aren't quite ready, it's experience anyway of writing the application, of potentially interview. But a lot of times it's our own, it's a little voice in the back of our head that's telling us we're not ready, or we're not, and that voice is generally called imposter syndrome. And I'm going to say that's a real thing. That little voice that tells you when you get a new role that, what are you doing? You have no idea what you're doing. You don't deserve this. That is not you. That is, most people generally speaking have that little voice telling them. Well, I know I certainly do. And having gone to a lot of leadership courses, I was so surprised to hear people with an impressive resume in quite senior roles talking about this little voice in the back of their head telling them, no one wants to hear what you have to say. No one's really interested. Why, like, who are you to give this advice? Who are you to be doing this role? You know, that is real for a lot of people. Most people generally have this imposter syndrome where you think that what you have, you don't deserve the role you have, or you don't have the experience or the knowledge necessary. But that's the role. The knowledge and skills come with time. You can't expect to have that day one. You've got to learn and develop. And for me, coming into a training officer role from being in a science lab-based role for so long was a steep learning curve, and that voice did pop up a lot, and I had to learn to quieten that voice and let myself have the time to develop and learn new skills. And I still, for quite a while, I was getting told, no, you're doing a really good job. And this voice was telling me, are you though? And I had to learn that, you know, it's a learning process. Occasionally it pops up and you're like, no, we're all on a learning journey, no matter how long you've been there. I mean, myself personally, I never want to be at a standstill. I always want to learn, develop, learn new things. I like when a challenge comes, I like to jump into it. When someone needed to work out how to use a new software, I taught myself the new software program. It was something completely different for me, but it needed to get done. I thought, why not me? Like, why can't it be me to learn this? And then now I look after a lot of the templates and things like that for that software, just because I thought, why not? So try not to let that voice limit yourself. Learn to just accept what it is. And I think it's a natural part of learning. It's this part of your brain just checking in, saying, you know, it is a bit of self-doubt, but sometimes it's healthy to check in with yourself and see how you're going, but don't let it dictate your choices for you, and don't let it derail where you're going, and accept that the whole thing is a learning process and you're not going to be perfect day one. So yeah, so that's kind of bits of advice and things like that. On the topic of recruitment, so if you're looking for jobs within FASS, sometimes we get told we're difficult to find, usually because we're under New South Wales Health Pathology, and sometimes that's where the jobs are advertised under. And usually they're using, if you want to look, I put some keyword search terms up there: scientific officer, technical assistant. And those are all advertised for through the I Work for New South Wales website. So that's where you can find if you're looking for jobs for us. Speaking of jobs at the moment, we're currently in the process of some recruitment. So there's some bulk recruitment underway at the moment, but there's also some potential positions getting, hopefully will advertise in the near future. So watch the space, which I'm trying in the process of organising. So there's potential positions coming up soon, hopefully. So that's something to look out for if you're interested in working, obviously, depending on how far you are through your qualification, obviously, but just something to keep an eye out. Doesn't always, so yeah, that's something to consider. But apart from that, Abbie, do you have any comments or advice for to do with recruitment and based on your experience?
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to get a job at FASS not long after finishing my undergraduate degree. If I've got any advice about applying for jobs, persistence and patience are both very important. Forensic science is a very important industry. There's a lot of applicants that apply for all the jobs that are advertised. Be patient. If you don't get an interview in your first few times applying, that's fine. Ask for feedback, improve your application for next time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It took me 6 applications to get an interview at FASS. And since being at FASS, I've done 2 other interviews. But yeah, just be patient. It will happen. There's not many positions available in forensic science, but when it's right, it will happen. Another one that's important, just believe in yourself. Like, there's a lot of people, Leesa and I both have dealt with, saying that, you know, they can't fulfill the position, they're not qualified enough, don't think they're good enough. Your only limit is yourself. Don't limit yourself to, like, you know, a lower duty. If you think, you know, you can't do it, you can do it. You get all your training, like, you know, on the job. I walked in with very minimal forensic skills, just everything from uni, and I was trained relatively quickly in the position. and I don't stop training. Every day is a new day. New things happen and never stops. You always train, always learning new skills and coming across new things every day. So just believe in yourself. And another tip about forensic science, good advice to join the FASS, the Australian and New Zealand Forensic Science Society. It's great networking opportunities they have at the moment because of COVID, Zoom calls that are presentations online with people within the forensic world. And it's really interesting stuff. And when the meetings are in person, you get to meet them, and it's a good opportunity. All right, has anyone got any questions?
Yes, I've got a question, if I might. Thank you so much, Leesa and Abbie, for that. That was just fantastic. And the fact that you were talking about that idea of not meeting all the criteria, stopping you from applying for jobs, I can't believe how much that resonated with me, and the fact that it's such a normal thing was such a nice thing to hear, and that everyone experiences. It was really great. So thank you for that. I was just wondering if you could provide some insights for you about what have been kind of the most rewarding and the most challenging parts of your roles within this organization, or even throughout kind of your career in science so far.
Okay, I'll tackle this one first and I'll hand over to Abbie. For me, well, with the Clan Lab team, a lot of that was a lot of technical challenges of learning new things. But on a different note, for training, that was about changing my mindset and how I approach things. And so I had this idea that I wasn't a people person. I was very science-based, I was very process-based, not a people person. And it took me until a couple of years ago to realize that's not true. So I actually, to develop the skills that I need to deal with, especially conflict. So I still deal with issues on occasion when it comes to training issues and having supervised staff. I still have to deal with conflict. So there were areas that for me were natural. I tend to shy away from conflict. So developing that side, but also I found how rewarding it is actually watching people grow. It sounds like just a line, but it is true. I actually enjoy watching staff come in, new staff like Abbie was a year or two ago, and watching them join the lab, learn things, be part of it, and watching their confidence grow, watching them actually being part of the team. And yeah, so that's kind of one of the most rewarding parts for me, is I'm kind of in the sidelines, kind of steering, kind of moving people along, moving the training along a little bit, trying to push things along. But seeing what comes out of it is actually really rewarding. So yeah, would be my answer. Abbie?
So working in the forensic science industry is very interesting. Every day we get to see a lot of cool things, different things, just all the interesting ways people like to smuggle drugs into our state. One of the biggest things about being in the forensic industry is learning new methods. So we have standard operating procedures that we use in the lab, just applying our science skills to these methods, learning the methods and understanding them, why we do certain things, and also being real flexible. Not everything works nice and smoothly. Wish it did, but it doesn't. You just always need to be willing to change, willingness for change, willing to adapt to change, and just try not to let things get in the way of your learning for your work. So, things might not be 100% in the lab, whatever, but, you got to focus on your work. You still need to, finish your work, get everything done. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Is there anyone else who'd like to ask any questions?
Bianca, we can't hear you. I can see that you are asking a question, but we can't hear you.
Maybe you can
We
write
can-
in the chat.
Yeah, okay.
Hi. Can you hear
Hi,
me?
yeah, we'll take your question in the meantime while Bianca writes her question.
I just have a question. So I'm studying about data science. So I just have a question about where do you see my background in data science can contribute to the field of your work?
Data science. I'm not too familiar with your actual qualification, unfortunately, but I have a feeling you've got some wide-ranging applications there. Like everything now is pretty much data. Can you just go summarize your qualification a little bit? So what is it that you're looking at, and what yeah, just a bit for me.
Sorry.
Can you summarize what your area of study is for me, just in a couple sentences?
So I'm studying about data science with machine learning knowledge, and mainly doing analysis about data, something like that.
I can't answer particularly exactly for our organisation, but I would think that there's a wide-ranging application there. Most data is obviously more and more important as we go along, so might be something that yeah, I'm not too sure how much I can contribute to that answer, but I definitely see a use for it within forensics and science in general, obviously. But in terms of our organisation, it's not something I'm too familiar with. Abbie, do you know have you got anything to add to that?
Not really. I think you've just covered it. Yeah, we don't really deal with too much of that at FASS, especially in drugs.
Thank you.
Just to add on that, you may already be aware the WiSE program has students from all STEM disciplines, so that includes technology, computing, engineering, and maths. So maybe if we can do a show of hands or in the chat, how many of you are actually doing science or specifically forensic science? The sciences, yeah. Or maybe if you can wave, or I think there's reactions on the side, you could do a thumbs up. Okay, we've got Kimmy doing science, Nicole, Sophie. Okay, so the majority is science.
Yeah, so I can see a few people looking on the chat saying what degrees and things they're looking at, what the qualifications they're currently studying. I see everything from forensic mortuary. Obviously, we've got our forensic medicine here at as part of FASS. We have the new coroner's court and mortuary morgue forensic medicine complex that's been built. So that's out at our campus site as well. So that's obviously something that's relevant to you. So it's quite a few people saying they work in forensic science. So has anyone got any questions about different things about what kind of work experience is available out there, what like jobs, or any questions of what's out there or anything like that for forensics? Feel free to put in the chat if you don't want to talk out loud.
I might just quickly ask, I just completed an undergraduate degree in Bachelor of Science, Biomedical Science was my major, so I haven't done forensics specifically, but I was just wondering, do you have opportunities for people to kind of come in as potentially kind of, not necessarily a volunteer position, but just kind of come in and see the work that you do in the lab, or is that not something that's really possible, especially kind of at the moment, given the situation? Yeah.
Work visits are a little tricky. We occasionally have university work visits and things like that. It's a little tricky given the sensitive nature of obviously what we're dealing with. We don't tend to have work experience or anything like that. and obviously because of COVID, we can't have on-site visitors at the moment anyway. Not having a forensic science specific degree is not a problem to applying for jobs either, as long as so make sure, I just wanted you to know that that is sort of an avenue if you were wanting to look for jobs within forensic science. That's still a science degree is of any type. A science degree is still relevant to some of our departments. So, or to our departments. So that's it's not something that would prevent you applying. But no, unfortunately, we don't have any sort of work experience or on-site visitation, especially visitation at this point, given COVID. But
yeah, of course.
Hopefully, eventually.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. All good, thank you.
Yeah, but keep an eye out on in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Positions. So
we'll do. Thank you.
Oh, there's some questions here. Oh, okay. 2 questions. Okay. Is your department involved in wastewater analysis for illicit drug seizures? And second, would you consider the lab walls repetitive? Abbie, I'll leave these ones to you.
First one, for illicit drug residues in wastewater. No, we just we analyze the actual these drugs from New South Wales Police. So we'll get them in drug bags, all different types of samples, and that's what we analyze. We don't actually analyze any wastewater. Is your role in the lab repetitive? Yes and no. Every exhibit that we deal with is different, and you have to analyze it differently. It just depends when you do your presumptive colour tests or your TrueNarc. Depends on how you're going to analyse it, but all of our samples get analysed by GCMS for qualitative analysis, and if it's required for quantitative, then we'll use UPLC or LCMS-MS. I hope that answered your question, Bianca.
Pretty much. Science jobs in their nature will have some repetitive aspect to it. There's no getting around that. I would say compared to many science jobs, our role, I would say that illicit drugs analysis unit is less repetitive than most. Depending on what you're dealing with sometimes with samples, but a lot of times you're dealing with an exhibit, a large exhibit consisting of a few different things, and you got to work out how best to tackle it, and you've got to, it's not always the same answer. So I would say probably compared to other analysis types, I think our lab is a little less repetitive than most. What would you say to that, Abbie?
Yeah, I agree. It really just depends on the exhibit, and you really don't know until you open your evidence bag what you're going to deal with. It's a bit of a lucky dip sometimes.
Yeah. We're lucky there's different sections within our department, so you're not always doing the same thing. There's lots of different roles, but yeah, and given the nature of science, and analysis, yes, there is a repetitive nature to it, and that will be in all lab-based jobs. So so that is a part, something to consider, but I wouldn't say it's the exact same thing day in, day out. So some of the questions, sorry.
So there's a question, are there any work experience or volunteer work? I think you covered that already.
Yeah.
Elise, thank you. We've got a question from Shahazadi. Can you still apply if you're in your second year?
It depends what role. Our technical assistant roles don't require any qualifications. So they're more data entry, some cleaning of laboratory equipment, some general lab maintenance. So that doesn't require any qualification. However, a technical officer position requires at least the diploma qualification. So you have to have completed a qualification. So you're not really eligible for a job unless you've completed your degree, basically, or whatever qualification you're undertaking. And so that's, yeah, something to consider as well, that you have to have completed that.
Great, thank you. We've got another question from Talia. Leesa, as a recruiter, I know you talked about core skills, but what else would you look for in a candidate applying? What qualities or experiences that would set them ahead of someone else?
Well, personally, when I'm doing recruitment, I'm not looking for someone who can rehash a textbook. That's meaningless to me. I want to see you apply that skill set. I want to see you consider the scope of the position. So a position like a technical assistant or technical officer position is a more limited scope. So a technical officer role is someone who can do a task following instructions with some level of decision making themselves, but it has a bigger scope for decision making than, say, a technical assistant. So I want someone who can think about, when they answer if there's a problem solving question that's lab based, think about what that role does and what level of responsibility that role has. So if in the future, if you're applying for a scientific officer role, they're responsible for an entire case. They go to court for that case, their name's on that report. And even if they didn't receive the exhibit or run the instrument, they still are responsible for knowing what happened to that case. And so the scope for that position is different, and understanding the responsibilities. And that usually comes across in the answers when we ask you to consider issues or troubleshooting or problem solving. You've got to think about what the expectation is of that job and the responsibility. So if someone has a responsibility of that role from start to finish for a case, then they've got to consider the whole case aspect when it comes to the answers. I'm not sure if you quite understand what I'm saying in term without an example, but I obviously can't give an example of interview questions. That would be unfair. But yeah, you really need to consider what the responsibility level of that position is and what they're responsible for, and consider all aspects of the role. And consider, I would say, yeah, if a question is asking for a problem-solving answer, consider what aspects go into that aren't necessarily just technical. Is there quality aspects? WHS, is there there's sometimes more to it. So try not to get tunnel vision and just go with, I know this aspect of the role, I'm experienced with this. Take a step back and think about, well, it's important to show what you're experienced with. Take a step back and think, is there any aspects that I'm missing? Because that's what they're looking for in the interview. Can you cover the scope of what that question's really getting down to? And do you understand the responsibilities and what really matters to this scenario? I think that's very important, not just jump right in and go tunnel vision to, I know this, I'm experienced in this. I see it time and time again with interviews. People have a certain experience level, say it's a technical officer applying for a scientific officer job, and they're really experienced in running instruments. They might sometimes get really stuck on talking about analysis instruments because it's what they're experienced with, which is great, but at the expense of discussing other aspects of the work, which is also relevant to the question. So that's something to keep in mind, of trying to avoid that tunnel vision. Any other questions?
Does anyone have any other questions? You can send in the chat or turn on your mic or video if you like.
There's a mention there about the variety in the job and whether or not working in a bigger lab would remove that variety. I guess it depends. It just depends on the nature of the samples you're dealing with and how automated the process is. And there's some labs that are more varied than others. Some labs have a more specific, limited scope of what they receive. Ours is a little bit broader, but saying that you can also get sample vials again and again and again. So it really just depends on what you're analysing and what you've been allocated to, what work you've been allocated that day. Because there are aspects to it. And I don't necessarily think going to a bigger lab changes the variety. It really comes down to what the requirement, what samples you have and what do you need to do, and is there a single workflow, or does your workflow branch and depend on what the previous results are? And is it, and for us, it's not set that we do this and only this. It just really depends on case by case basis. So yeah. Is there anything else?
Hey, yes, sorry, I just had a quick question. Do you get training in all or most departments, or is it just the one and then you have to apply for other departments as well?
Abbie, you want to grab this one?
Sure. Good question. So when you get a job at FASS, depends on your position. So when you're a technical assistant in the receipt unit, you go around to all the different labs within FASS and you perform different duties for different labs. But for for technical officers and scientific officers, you are for that one lab. So you don't go to the different departments, you just stay in that one area.
Awesome, thank you.
That's okay.
Saying that though, once say if you got a role as a technical officer in one lab, that doesn't stop you from getting applying for scientific officers roles in another lab. So it isn't that you have to pick one path and go down that. We are quite mindful that people do move between labs, but yes, as Abbie said, it's the position is for a specific department. So yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? No? Okay, well, I am mindful of the time. So I wanted to thank Leesa and Abbie for joining us today. Thank you for your time and for your advice and insights into the forensic science industry, and as well tips on applying for opportunities at FASS. I think one of the takeaway messages for me also is not getting stuck on those selection criteria questions and not being able to complete all 10, for example. We do hear that a lot, that women are harsher on themselves than men, and if they can't fulfill every single selection criteria, they won't apply. In fact, just last week, we had a speaker from Professionals Association mention the same thing. And just a piece of advice that she gave that I'd like to pass on is that if you look at a selection criteria and you don't think it challenges you, then you're probably not going to grow in this next role. You're just taking more of a horizontal step rather than growing into something else. So yeah, so thank you once again, Leesa and Abbie. We will be compiling today's session into a short video that we will post on our YouTube playlist and also into our Career Hub resources. So yeah, thank you very much for your time again, and we hope to reconnect with you guys soon.
Thanks very much for having us, and I hope everyone got something out of today. It was really nice to be here, so thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
No problem. Well, thank you very much,
Thanks
everyone.
so
Have
much.
a lovely night.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.